Hello, and welcome to the DD Hangout Show. Today we will be discussing cybersecurity, a presidential mandate. With me today I have Matthew Guide, Neil Campbell, and Martin Schlatter. So, over to you, Matthew.
Thanks, JJ, and welcome everybody to the second Google Hangout that the security team is putting together. As we've been instructed by by Natasha specifically, we're not allowed to make jokes this time for the 18 minutes to the 30 minutes, but we hopefully will be able to keep you entertained. So it's quite a big title that you saw us come in with there, the presidential discussion, and we're in a fortunate position that President Obama got up on stage a couple of weeks ago at Stanford University at their Cybersecurity Summit to talk about cybersecurity specifically. He also signed in to place a piece of a document that basically enables the security industry to collaborate in terms of some of the information that they're gathering. We've always historically seen the industry stand alone and develop tools for clients that are very specifically focused to their product lines. So I think fantastic that President Obama got involved in that, made those statements, but we're also seeing significant actions happening around the world. Our very own Alistair McGibbon was recently leaving Dimension Data. Unfortunately, it was great to have him on board, but he's going to be the Children's E-Safety Commissioner in Australia, which shows the Australian commitment to looking after children on the internet, but the bigger picture of we're getting serious about cybersecurity and how we can defend not only national assets but also our clients' assets, enterprises' assets. Neil, I think you probably want to launch into something about what other governments are doing outside of the US as well. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think this is one of those areas where the change in society has outpaced the government's ability to legislate to react to that change. That's why we see basically criminal havens, cyber criminal havens, so jurisdictions that lack extradition treaties, or where cybercrime is generally kind of overlooked, or even in some cases encouraged and funded by the nation in which the criminals reside. We're seeing a number of interesting approaches to try to combat that. One of them is, for example, some legislation in one jurisdiction that I believe has also been mirrored in the US, allowing law enforcement agents who are executing a search warrant to access any computer that is accessible from the site of the search warrant. Now, when you consider that most places have an internet connection, we basically have governments authorizing their law enforcement agents to hack anything, anywhere on the internet, provided it is likely that that will provide information as to the commission of an offence. Now, that's all very well for one government to do, but it doesn't necessarily make it not a criminal offence in the other jurisdiction. One of the really interesting other things that we've seen just recently, I believe it was today, that President Obama also signed an executive order really allowing the US government to go after the proceeds of crime from cyber criminals, specifically within the US, but then it also mentions diplomatic efforts with other countries. So you can expect now that that governments will be much more closely collaborating to try to go after the proceeds of crime, the money that these criminals are generating, regardless of what jurisdiction they're in. And they'll do things like freeze bank accounts and ultimately seize the assets if they can proceed to a prosecution. And I think this kind of thing is it's incredibly necessary, actually. It walks the line between, to a certain extent, privacy and the needs of the state. It also blurs the line between the sovereignty of nations. But just like we've always had, extradition treaties, and we have organisations like Interpol to allow for close cooperation around cybercrime, not just cybercrime but all crime. I think we're seeing a strengthening of the legislation in the cybercrime area in order to try to protect us from some of the very, very modern forms of attack that we're seeing.
Great. Thanks, Neil. It's obviously your laptop's very close to your eyes there, and just for everybody out there that's watching this, both Neil and I in the US at the moment. So it's just cracked on to midnight. We've had a reasonably big week at a conference, sort of entertaining both clients and trying to understand what's going on in the industry as well. So you'll notice that Martin looks significantly handsomer than us tonight. So it's
fresh.
this workshop has given him the nice haircut, and he's looking quite suave. But yeah, Neil, I think the key point that you brought up there around privacy, right? It's this industry is you can go too far with some of the legislation in terms of you're impinging on citizens, and not only citizens but also enterprise privacy. There's got to be certain aspects of our lives that we need to protect, and we don't need to publicize. Although it seems as though a lot of the younger generation are focusing on Facebook to tell us what they're doing, how they're doing it, when they're doing it, which is makes for a great piece of information for criminal enterprise. But Martin, I think last time we spoke about this, you had some pretty significant ideas around that. So, Martin, if you want to jump in right now.
No, it's a valid comment you make relating to the new generation of children who are far more less reluctant to impart their information or their data or how they go about their daily lives. So I think, depending on your age, and I don't want to age the three of us, but let's assume we've been around a while. I think we're far more aware of the data that exists about us and where it resides, whereas I think our children and their generation has far less problems sharing their information. So it might be a hangover of the era that we come from, that we're far more aware of privacy. But I don't think generations to come are that concerned about it, given the amount that goes out on the internet now. I think the other thing is that we seem to be okay with the awareness that hackers can make off with credit card information or practically any information related to us by virtue of the fact that they can get onto our computers, but we are less willing to share information to our government, who may indeed help us keep that information away from people who want that information to sell it, and to sell it to a mass market. So I think it's important. I think privacy in your own life is important. It is a human right. But I do think that we need to be aware that the hackers are winning the race, and we probably have to give up a little bit. It's a case of sacrificing a little bit to give to the right people to ensure that we can safeguard information.
That's a good point.
I just think that we're nobody really knows where the line is, and it's probably a fine line. But I do believe that we have to finally admit that we're losing the race, and we have to do something that allows our governments to assist in responding. And I think it's more important now because threats have become multinational, they have become global, they are not constrained to your territory or your government or your borders. It's in fact more likely that you're being exploited from somewhere outside your own borders. So I do think the privacy matter is valid, but I do think we need to start supporting our governments and start supporting enterprise that allows us to share the correct information to combat that.
It's a valid point, I think. Sorry, just to dive in, you look at one of the other executive orders that President Obama has signed, and that focuses on an increase in sharing of cyber threat information between government and industry. And it's actually important that initiative come from government, because industry has many responsibilities placed on it with regard to the privacy of its clients, basically. And so too does government, and really to try to change the rules there and come up with a better, more valid, more timely, more detailed information of cyber threats, so that action can be taken quickly. We really do have to make some compromises in the area of privacy, and I say that being an advocate of privacy, and I think, Martin, you're making the same point. This requires, I think, vigorous debate, because we always need to be careful that we're not giving up our human rights in order to make maybe a small gain. So it's important that if we're going to give up any rights, it's to increase the safety of our society, and that the gain justifies the loss, basically.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, if I could make a comment there as well. I think the key thing to remember here is the governments have a lot of data, and that data is things that we as a society are putting out onto the internet, be it Facebook, Twitter, whatever it may be. But it's not necessarily information or intelligence about an individual. It's data. So you've got to qualify that, you've got to quantify that, and then obviously contextualize that. So it's I see that your privacy is you're giving up a lot of privacy, but the government's going to take that information, use it, and then make it something that's compelling in order to act upon it. So, sorry, Martin, to interrupt you there.
No, I think and the U.S. government are probably going about it in a fairly pragmatic way in that they're making some high-profile employment decisions in the White House from the private sector. So I think they're getting hold of people who've had some significant roles in Google and Twitter and Facebook, and those people are very well aware of what information they host on their servers and what people are offering on a day-to-day basis. And I guess if you're going to get a real view of what the general population is sharing voluntarily, these people probably have a good idea as to what that is. And maybe that's the starting point, is a review of what people are really willing to share on a voluntary basis day to day, and then taking it from there, because clearly those platforms like Facebook and Twitter have made that information globally available to millions of people.
And some of this is being taken out of our hands. There was some recent legislation in Australia passed which will require all internet service providers to retain metadata for all of their clients for 2 years. And that gives, and obviously it's then available relatively easily, with a relatively low bar in terms of proving their need for it to law enforcement agencies. So, that's another thing that may be useful in investigating cybercrime. Will be very easy to get access to, and may reveal far more about an individual's life or lifestyle than they're comfortable having revealed. So these are the legislative mechanisms that are coming into place, and we're all going to have to deal with them. I think also to your point, I think Matt and Martin, you both touched on it. There's a lot that industry can do without needing government to direct it. And I think about if I think about some of the things that we're doing with our NTT iCubed organization, our global threat intelligence platform, pulling together anonymized information relating to cybersecurity threats. I think many of our technology partners, the bigger security vendors in the market, are also either creating services like that or have created services like that. And we're all talking about how we can share that information, basically for so that we can create a richer data set, so that we can protect our clients better. It makes very little sense for us to create a dozen isolated islands of threat information and try to sell them off to our clients. Obviously, we're commercial. We need to make money when we deliver services. But to try to sell them off as competing services, I think there's a real opportunity here to bring the industry together and produce high quality information that we're all able to pass the benefit on to our clients from.
Yeah, and do you think, Neil, that's where the industry frameworks or standards really start to stand up? So the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, is one that we're hearing a lot in the industry at the moment, where the government's referring to that as the framework or the standard that they're going to align to. I mean, maybe that these standards aren't written by government; they're written by potentially government-aligned organisations, but really designed to protect the individual and the corporation. So do frameworks become much more important as we move forward into this new world where potentially everyone from a consumer to an enterprise to a government is sharing information, not to spy on each other, not to impinge on privacy, but to really ensure that they're protecting society and making it even more difficult for the bad guys to start launching malware attacks or whatever it may be that they want to do. So just throwing that one out there. I don't know if you guys have got comments on it.
Yeah, I think standardization for data sharing and data formats is certainly critical, and I think we we've been going on about personal information, but it's not only about that. That's certainly not the only way to protect ourselves, defend ourselves, and arm ourselves against hackers. Certainly there's a whole bunch of network traffic and data traffic that needs to be analyzed and collected, and so the personal information is one, but the other one is how do we share information about malware and about threats that we're seeing on our systems on a day-to-day basis. And so yes, government aligning with or recognizing frameworks like NIST is a good thing, because I think it allows public sector to also then gather around, or the private sector to gather around those frameworks, support them, and then just facilitate a much easier way of sharing that data. So even in data exchange for large volumes of data, from a threat point of view, something like our global threat intelligence platform, it helps to have a standard format for exchanging data with other partners. It just makes it so much easier to do. So that's going to be fundamental and key. And that's not to say I don't think government should legislate what the standard should be, but I certainly think companies should be encouraged to support standards and then to decide on which ones make the most sense. Because I think without a level of data that can be shared fairly easily, we're never going to be able to keep pace with the way the hackers are moving. So that's absolutely critical.
Yeah, totally agree with that. It's Neil and I were at a conference over the last couple of days, and yeah, a couple of the key points I took away from that was the infrastructure is getting cheaper, which means it's cheaper for the bad guys to launch malware attacks or DDoS or viruses, whatever it may be. It's so as that cost of infrastructure goes down, becomes cheaper to do. Therefore, the attacks can become more targeted. But I think one of the key things about how do we address that, we need to make a bad guy, for them when they're starting to attack people or individuals or corporations, needs to be more expensive for them. And sort of really drive that message in. And how do we do that? Maybe this is one of the ways, sharing that intelligence across not only enterprise but into consumer, and making sure that when we're sharing that information, something's done with it. So it needs to be contextualized. And I think, Neil, you sort of started to bring that point up around GTIP, is that the Global Threat Intelligence Platform isn't just about providing a feed for our clients, but contextualizing it and giving them directions and steps that they can potentially take to address a problem. So.
Yeah, and ultimately over time, we will need to, and again, some companies are starting to automate the response based on the threat feed. These attacks are very fast moving, and it can be one thing to alert somebody to an attack that's imminent to them, and quite another to automatically recraft their systems, reshape their policies in order to defend against that attack without them needing to intervene. And again, I think here we are at one of those, we're approaching one of those tipping points that we saw between intrusion detection and intrusion prevention. In the old days of intrusion detection, we didn't trust the technology enough to have it actively change policies and start blocking traffic. I think the user community, the IT community, was terrified that would break an application and create downtime on their network. Then over time, the technology proved itself, and now you wouldn't stop with intrusion detection. You would implement an intrusion prevention system. It's just a question of how aggressively it identifies and prevents particular types of traffic or attacks. And I think that's where we are as well with threat intelligence, where it's early-ish days for the industry, but I think over time it will become instantly actionable. Or instantly actioned. Then with slightly less levels of certainty, there'll be informational feeds that you would need to consider before taking some action. So yeah, it's obviously all of this threat intelligence is great, but it's no good unless it's timely.
Yeah, and I think the security industry, I mean, obviously, people were very conservative with using the internet or their own personal computers or even their company's computers initially. And then there was a level of, I guess, security professionals built up a level of trust with enterprises and clients and consumers that we nearly went to the opposite direction, right? Where we we trusted everything that we did, that it'd be good, that there'd be no bad guys out there trying to attack us. We've spent our however big the budget was on IT security. We've done that, and suddenly I'm being hacked again. What's going on here? So it's funny how the industry swings, and I think we're nearly back at that 180 degrees where we kind of started from, where there is no trust in the systems that we're using, and it's and there's enormous impacts across the industry for that. It's the cost of sale goes up for people who sell consumer goods. I mean, the list of things goes on, where life becomes much more expensive because that inherent trust we had in the systems isn't there anymore. I think, Martin, I think we're doing a lot around our MSSP offering, and not only taking those GTIP feeds in, but contextualizing it, and hopefully we're building trust up for our clients once again. And do you have any comments around that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in terms of what we're doing for our clients, in our Threat Intelligence Alliance, or TIA, is exactly that, taking multiple feeds from people that will share, and then creating context for that within the systems that we use to monitor them. And the upside for our clients, of course, is that they get information that's validated from multiple different sources. And the important thing, though, is that we give them the context against how to use that information and how to remediate within their own environment. I think what would be really handy to have is prior knowledge of that information, if it's existing somewhere else and existing at a level that we deem to be dangerous, that we can even be proactive before we see it happening on our own clients' environments, like in a particular geography that's not near our clients in a particular vertical, that we can take some proactive action. So we're certainly doing that as much as we can, but while it would be a lot more effective if we were able to leverage something that's at a far greater scale and a far bigger scale for our clients. And I think that's where the whole topic of cybersecurity and the government mandate comes in, because I think that's one way of allowing us to do that. And I think a number of clients are struggling with the admission that it's almost acceptable now to say that we agree that we've been breached. I don't think we can put our heads in the sand anymore. I think it's common knowledge that you probably are breached, or you probably do have exploits within your environment. It's how quickly you can confront them and address them. I think to a large extent, clients that would prefer to ignore the fact that there is a breach occurring, or that there is somebody in their environment that shouldn't be there, is now dangerous. And so these things are critical. So with TIA, or the Threat Intelligence Alliance, we aim to try and get a little bit ahead of the game. But I think, as we've said before, the hacker community has so many platforms that they can leverage, that are cheap to get onto, that are really flexible, so they can move their footprint around at a fairly rapid rate, and that makes it harder for companies like ours to use something like the Threat Intelligence Alliance to keep track of them. So I think we have to admit that a breach is probably in play, or at any one time we probably are breached. We need to have some contextual, proactive information, but we probably need to be sharing that at a meaningful level. If we know of an attacker doing something from somewhere, we need to almost share that on a platform that companies like ours can access at an ad hoc basis or on an ongoing basis, and can then test within their own environments.
Yeah, and I think, Martin, Dimension Data as a company absolutely supports whatever we can do to help the industry sort of overcome and create that trust, get that trust back into it. I think, Neil, you were in Washington a couple of weeks before Obama made the statement at the Cybersecurity Summit in California. So I think there was some good, robust discussion going on there. I mean, maybe want to talk about that for a minute or two, and then sort of press on with how Dimension Data can potentially align with the industry to make sure that we're driving the right behavior.
Yeah, certainly. There were a couple of things we were talking about in Washington. That was an internal conference across the NTT group. One of them is how can we better collaborate? Just within what is a very large global company with with disparate operating companies within that. So we were basically pooling our R&D, pooling our capabilities and looking to leverage them for the best of the company and therefore our clients. And the other one was, how can we be more active in the community that's advising governments, basically, kind of specifically around telecommunications. That's the background of NTT, but also, we're an incredibly large security player as well. So also, looking at how can we provide better security advice and security support to governments, and President Obama did talk about the need to set up industry bodies that are specifically created as kind of conduits of information toward the government as a part of his initiative, and we're certainly actively pursuing that because, again, it just makes sense from a corporate social responsibility perspective. It makes sense if I'm to think kind of selfishly about us as a business. It makes sense as a branding exercise. It makes sense in terms of proving our credentials to our clients that we're incredibly active in the industry and contributing toward longer-term solutions, that aren't focused on the next shiny product or the next great service.
Yeah, great. I think absolutely agree with those points, Neil. And I think we've got probably 4 minutes left, guys. I don't know if you've got any couple of tiny statements that you want to make that key takeaways from this conversation. I mean, for me, it's this is going to happen. Absolutely, the more input that companies such as Dimension Data, not only vendors and government have into the situation, it'll be much better as a product or something that can be consumed by enterprise and the consumer to make them feel safer and create that level of trust in the environment they're operating in. But guys, any further comments there?
No, I mean, just a parting comment from me is that I think the US government has probably taken the lead in establishing a desire to have more meaningful online engagement, between the government and the US citizens. I think we recognize as a multinational company that the problem exists globally across borders, and I think I'd almost like to see it as being governments in general wanting to have more online engagement with citizens of the world in general. I think we need to embrace that, and I think we need to influence it, because I think if we just leave it to government, the result may not be what we typically want. So I think if we embrace it and participate in it, I think the outcome is something that we can better influence. And I think companies like ours have a big role to play. We certainly have a big footprint. We see a lot of the internet's data in general. We support a number of clients that are truly multinational and they're cross-border. And so I think we have an obligation as Dimension Data to participate in that process and to get involved. So we're certainly going to be doing more of this in future as opposed to less, and are supportive as long as we have a say in how it develops.
Yeah, and I agree. As I think has been said a couple of times during this conversation, the criminals are adapting incredibly quickly. My experience in law enforcement tells me once a criminal works out a clever way to make some money, they become incredibly hard to dislodge as fast as you can change the rules, as fast as you can change the control mechanisms. They'll adapt. There are no, they have no corporate governance requirements. They don't have to go and ask someone for money. They can move incredibly quickly. And I think what we're seeing now is the industry is speeding up in its ability to, to create more long-term solutions that will help to counter, some of the incredible adaptability that we're seeing in the criminal community.
Yeah, great guys. I think we're pretty much right on time there in terms of it's time to wrap up. I think Neil, thanks for still being awake at midnight to do this. Martin, thanks for being awake mid-afternoon to also attend it, and actually attending. So it was great that you were here. We always get a significant amount of value of you being on these sorts of things, so it's greatly appreciated. I think with that we'll wrap up and say good night, good morning, good evening. I think hopefully you get some value out of this if you get to watch it either live as we are right now. Or you look it up on Google and have a look at it. I think our last one got quite a few hits. I think this one we've probably added a significant amount more value in terms of content, but yeah, hopefully people still watch it without the jokes. So thank you very much, and good night.
Thank you,
Thanks, everyone.
folks.